Earnings at the end of the month. It's right now is at 134. What your target is for NVIDIA. You said this is good news for AMD, NVIDIA, but is NVIDIA the high was 153 last December. Do you buy ahead of the earnings?
Yeah, I mean, it's had quite a move here, definitely. I would say we're buyers on any weakness, any pullbacks on the stock. That's what we would be telling our investors. So, clearly, when you think about earnings season here, we do think earnings will be a positive catalyst in the sense that, I'd expect to hear more good news than anything from Jensen Huang. You've got Computex also next week that, Jensen will be a keynote speaker here. So, and then you've also got the Google I/O conference next week as well. So there are going to be a number of AI potential catalysts here over the next 10 days or so. We do think most of the news flow is going to be positive in nature. So if you are going to see any sort of pullbacks in this market on the AI side of things, we would be buyers on those news because of the fact that the visibility is absolutely improving here over the next couple of quarters.
NVIDIA's market capitalization has risen above $3 trillion once more thanks to a significant recovery. Perhaps more than any other firm, NVIDIA is well positioned to become the first to exceed a $4 trillion market cap. However, due to economic uncertainties, it is questionable when NVIDIA will reach that milestone. In June 2024, NVIDIA's market value surpassed $3 trillion. Before a sharp sell-off this year, the massive GPU manufacturer stayed over the barrier for the most of the following 8 months. NVIDIA has joined Apple and Microsoft in the $3 trillion club, though. By 2026, could it potentially surpass the first $4 trillion stock? What actions did NVIDIA take to recover? Nothing by itself. We must first comprehend the reasons for the stock's initial decline in order to comprehend its recovery. Strict trade restrictions imposed by the Trump administration on H20 GPU exports to China were a major offender for NVIDIA. As a result, NVIDIA declared that it would incur a $5.5 billion write-down in the first quarter of 2025. Like many other stocks, NVIDIA's share price has been significantly impacted by the White House's tariffs. Investors were particularly alarmed by China's retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods and its exceptionally high duties on imports from China. It makes sense that more positive news on the trade front contributed to a recovery given the circumstances that caused NVIDIA's stock to decline. The Trump administration's early indications in recent weeks that Chinese tariffs would be reduced were beneficial. There was additional cause for confidence with the recent 90-day halt on certain of the tariffs. Microsoft is closest to the $4 trillion mark, while NVIDIA is once again in the $3 trillion club and has already surpassed Apple's market capitalization. However, is it possible for NVIDIA to surpass Microsoft and maintain its lead over Apple? It's really likely. The price of Microsoft's stock is about 30 times its projected earnings. The projected earnings multiple for Apple is about 27. With shares trading at 26.9 times forward earnings, NVIDIA is just a hair behind. If everything else is equal, NVIDIA may have more leeway than Microsoft and roughly the same amount as Apple thanks to its lower valuation. But not all of these tech behemoths have the same growth prospects. According to Wall Street, NVIDIA's profits should increase by about 47% this fiscal year and 29% the following year. By comparison, experts predict for Apple's earnings to increase 18% this year and 9% next year, with Microsoft forecasting earnings growth of roughly 14% this year and almost 13% next year. Compared to Apple and Microsoft, I believe NVIDIA is better positioned to become the first $4 trillion stock. Amazon and Alphabet, the parent company of Google, are also competitors, but I consider them to be dark horses in the race. However, I am less certain about the timing of NVIDIA's potential to reach a $4 trillion market cap by 2026. Although investors are understandably thrilled about the diminished threat of a full-scale trade war between the U.S. and China, it appears likely that significant tariffs will still be imposed, which could still somewhat hinder the company's operations. Additionally, a potential economic slowdown brought on by the tariffs may cause some businesses to reduce their investments in artificial intelligence, AI, which could have a negative impact on the growth of data centers. To reach $4 trillion, NVIDIA's market value would have to increase by about 25%. I believe that within the next 18 months, this level of growth might be achieved. However, a number of factors could make it more difficult to accomplish the goal in such a short period of time. NVIDIA will be the first $4 trillion stock, in my opinion, but I won't say when it will do so. So what implications does this have for NVIDIA's stock? Let's explore that. But first, a big thank you to those of you who've stuck with us this far. Creating these videos takes significant effort and dedication, so if you're enjoying the content, please hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and share your thoughts on NVIDIA stock in the comments. Your support truly helps us grow. Now, let's get back to the video.
With us, we're seeing some positive analyst comments. What's going on here with NVIDIA and AMD today?
Yeah, good morning, Nicole. These stocks gaining more momentum, building on what's been a monster rally in the last few sessions. This, of course, after the news out of the Middle East yesterday. Bank of America, notably this morning, raising price targets both on NVIDIA and AMD. 150 to 160 with a buy rating on NVIDIA, 120 to 130 buy rating with AMD. The news, both separately, these two companies announcing multi-year AI infrastructure projects with Humane, which is a subsidiary of the Saudi Arabia Public Investment Fund. The firm, which sizes these projects to be around 3 to 5 billion annually, or about 15 to 20 billion over a multi-year period, thinks this sovereign AI could help address limited power availability for data centers in the U.S., plus offset headwinds from restrictions on the U.S. companies shipping to China. This also was in conjunction with the Department of Commerce initiating a rescinding of the Biden administration's AI diffusion rule. We had gotten news that that was likely to happen. I believe it was late last week. Actually on the Fed day, later that afternoon of the Fed day, as it led to a huge rally. Well, now we have definitive initiation that is actually going to happen from the Department of Commerce. So both of these things continue to add fuel to this rally, particularly within these AI semiconductor names that had led us higher over the last 2 years.
Yeah, absolutely. We did get some of that news from last week, but it brings optimism, and we continue to gain. I mean, you know, when we were looking 12 of 14 days were higher, and I stopped counting. The NASDAQ is up 5 days in a row. We'll take it. People are feeling somewhat better. Sentiment has improved since the big pause and deal that we had with China, too. That is bringing things.
Following a 15% surge over the previous 5 days, NVIDIA's shares surged more than 4% on Wednesday, putting the AI chip giant stock back in the black for the year. During an investment meeting that President Trump visited on Tuesday, U.S. chipmakers, including NVIDIA, announced billions of dollars in partnerships with Saudi Arabia. Starting with the sale of one of its most recent Grace Blackwell AI supercomputers, which uses 18,000 of its cutting-edge GB300 chips, over the next 5 years, NVIDIA plans to supply several 100,000 of its AI chips to Humane, an AI business based in Saudi Arabia. Humane, a new artificial intelligence business owned by Saudi Arabia's $925 billion public investment fund, is chaired by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. It was introduced just 1 day before Trump's trip to the nation. In a note to investors on Wednesday morning, Bank of America analysts increased their price objective for NVIDIA shares from $150 to $160, estimating the deal's overall worth at $7 billion. The shares of NVIDIA was further bolstered by a Bloomberg story published on Tuesday that implied the Trump administration will come to an arrangement to allow the United Arab Emirates to purchase more than 1 million of the company's AI chips. A fellow. Additionally, agreements to supply processors to Humane for its ambitious AI data center aspirations over the next few years were announced by U.S. chipmakers Advanced Micro Devices and Qualcomm. The amount of the deal with AMD was $10 billion. Bernstein analyst Stacy Raskin says the news is good for demand for AI equipment. As Saudi Arabia aspires to establish itself as a regional and international center for artificial intelligence, we now have another wealthy client that is prepared and able to invest significant sums of money in a blatantly strategic push, he said in a message to investors early Wednesday, addressing concerns about the sustainability of AI capital expenditures. Tuesday's actions could serve as support against concerns of a capex peak, though we will have to wait and see how many of the announced programs actually materialize. While U.S. big tech companies are still working out how to effectively monetize their AI products, investors have been closely examining whether they can maintain historically high levels of investment on AI infrastructure. The disclosure came as Saudi Arabia and President Trump promoted a $600 billion plan for the kingdom and corporations based there to purchase U.S. technology, weaponry, and infrastructure. However, the investments announced on Tuesday so far total significantly less than $600 billion. To stay informed about the latest developments from NVIDIA and the ever-changing stock market, consider subscribing to our investing tutorial channel. We provide daily updates on significant market shifts and key catalysts, so hit that subscribe button to ensure you never miss crucial information. We'd love to hear your thoughts on NVIDIA stock, so please share your opinions in the comments below. Now, let's dive into today's video.
NVIDIA, and folks are so excited because they saw NVIDIA go down below $100, and they, obviously questioned what's next and felt like doomsday was here, only to see it run back up now, and it's at 133. There's also another story about NVIDIA when it comes to AI and Saudi Arabia and deal making and all that. Tell us a little bit about what's on your mind when I say NVIDIA to you.
Yeah, so thanks for having me, Nicole. And I'd say, you're absolutely right. You look at a couple of weeks ago, NVIDIA was definitely left for dead. You look today, over the last 2 to 3 weeks, I'd say the overall outlook for NVIDIA has significantly improved. And the biggest reason for that is just based on what we've seen on the policy side of things, right? And Saudi Arabia, just what we kind of saw here over the last day or two, is a big part of that. But if you just kind of take a step back here, just for a second, over the last 2 weeks or so, I'd say it really started with Q1 earnings season from a number of the hyperscalers. All of them pretty much reconfirmed 2025 capex expectations, where even some of the likes like Microsoft hinted towards higher capital spending into 2026. So that improved the visibility going into next year, which was a big concern for the street. You then kind of move over to the last couple of days with the US-China trade deal, obviously a good thing for hardware and the broader chip space. And more recently here with the Saudi Arabia news, that's a big deal in the sense that there was, we just saw the administration scrap the AI diffusion rules. And, I think there might have been concerns on how the administration would have handled NVIDIA on a country-by-country basis. But now it looks like they're going to use NVIDIA as this kind of bargaining chip, as well as AMD. And it makes all the sense in the world, because the most valuable IP that we have in this country is probably NVIDIA's GPU. So you can now kind of go country by country and almost think about the potential for NVIDIA to be included in more and more deals out there. And that, leads to higher sovereign AI revenue. I'd also say when you start thinking about China, even more specifically, where they were just locked out of because of the H20, it's interesting because now there's the potential for the US and China to come back to trade talks in the next couple of weeks. And then you have to also imagine and potentially consider, does NVIDIA have access to potentially get back into the China market, which we think is possible. So I think all of that maybe is slowly starting to get priced into this market, but we see more upside just based on a lot of that stuff that we just mentioned.
So it's a great bargaining chip. I mean, you explained it so well here. And with Saudi Arabia, you had those sort of the hurdles in the Biden era rolled back. Now we'll be able to have NVIDIA chips supplying processors to Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and it sets the tone because they have this joint conference that they had and make this deal. And it's sort of like without NVIDIA, they're looking for it. And so by saying and lifting some of those restrictions, it opens up to so much more. In fact, now we have Saudi Arabia doing a $600 billion investment package. I think that's going to be in the U.S. So that's also, they're talking about the analyst estimates being 15 billion to 20 billion in revenue with deals like this that are happening. So it's good for our American companies, and we get U.S. investments.
Yeah. I mean, that's absolutely right. And on top of all this on the semiconductor side of things, right? I think what's really interesting is that the administration has this kind of pending 232 semiconductor investigation, which we still need to wait on and see what the actual outcome is on top of that in terms of the tariffs. But the whole goal here, right, is to have more and more of these chips basically built in the U.S. Maybe not all of it. And definitely not all of it, but if you can get some more of it built in the U.S., specifically some of these GPUs, NVIDIA's GPUs, and then maybe ship them out to regions like a Saudi Arabia, you're talking about jobs being built here in the U.S., and you're talking about overall higher revenue for a company like NVIDIA, and potentially ways for them to circumvent a lot of these potential tariffs that get embedded from this 232 semiconductor investigation. So there are ties to all these moving parts that are out there right now. But ultimately, yes, I mean, the Saudi Arabia news is definitely a positive for NVIDIA and AMD. They're going to see, higher revenue. It's not going to be game changing in nature, but again, it's one piece towards potentially a bigger domino effect that we see here over the next couple of months and years for both of those companies.
Following a difficult few months, NVIDIA's price surged on Wednesday, bringing shares closer to positive territory for 2025. At the conclusion of business on Tuesday, shares were down 3% so far this year. Shortly after Trump prohibited the AI chipmaker from exporting its chips to China, the Saudi Arabian contract helped improve Wall Street's expectations for the company's overseas sales. His administration, however, sought to remove the limitations placed by Biden on NVIDIA's exports to the Middle East and other parts of the world. Biden's so-called AI diffusion regulation, which was intended to prevent the smuggling of U.S. AI chips, specifically those made by NVIDIA, to China, was being revoked, the Department of Commerce revealed on Tuesday. Additionally, the department stated that it is against U.S. export regulations to use Huawei Ascend chips anywhere in the world. According to reports, NVIDIA's previous generation Hopper chips can compete with Huawei's most recent Ascend chips. Bernstein's Razgan said, Huawei chips are not made in the U.S. nor shipped from there, and reportedly at least are manufactured without using U.S. technology. Thus, it is not clear how customers using them would be in breach of U.S. export prohibitions. However, he added, such a reading of the regulations would obviously make it harder for Huawei to sell Ascend chips to customers outside of China, and appear to expose Chinese users of the parts to more of the U.S.'s regulatory hammers, which is likely good for NVIDIA and other U.S. AI companies, though it is unclear how China would react. Don't forget to share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Your input helps create a more knowledgeable community where we can all learn and grow together in the world of investing. Stay up to date with the latest market trends, insights, and key updates by subscribing to Investing Tutorial. We're here to help you make smarter investment decisions and stay ahead of the curve.
Before we go, to get a quick check on chips as well, because that's been a lot of where the action has been as well today. It's names like NVIDIA, it's AMD, it's Qualcomm, of course, Saudi Arabia. President Trump was there, a lot of announcements, and a lot of excitement from investors.
Exactly. Yep. Here you got your semiconductor stocks. You can see NVIDIA, a huge pop there.
4% in NVIDIA. Well, we have just the man to talk to about chip stocks, including NVIDIA and AMD, moving back today on the back of AI deals between Saudi Arabia and U.S. technology firms. For more on the sector, I want to bring in now Patrick Moorhead, founder, CEO, and chief analyst at More Insights and Strategy. Patrick, it is great to see you as always, particularly today, Patrick, because you are the man to answer this question. I was just talking to Maddie, these moves we see in these chip names, Patrick, and of course we had President Trump in Saudi Arabia. We had this flurry of headlines, reports, AI-specific announcements, NVIDIA, AMD, Qualcomm. You did, Patrick, on X. You asked an interesting question, I thought, Patrick, off those announcements. You asked, listen, are these hard deals? Are these hard contracts? Or more like kind of, soft LOIs, letters of intent? What's your line of sight there, Patrick?
Yeah, so first of all, the only similarity between these AI deals is that they were with Humane and the KSA, right? But they were very different, right? AMD was all about a joint venture with a $10 billion price tag, but no details on who's funding what, where would the AMD capitalization come from? So, when the details aren't there, you have to assess that this thing is early in. And then with NVIDIA, it was really straightforward, right? They're selling GPUs with a price tag estimated at around $7 billion, but still no firm commitment, no firm order around that. But with that said, it's very exciting because I don't think investors were factoring any of this into their theses going into this.
Patrick, one question for chip investors, of course, has been whether we kind of hit this peak in capex, right? And my question to you is, was that question in any way answered by what we just saw in Saudi Arabia? And here's how Bernstein's Stacy Rasgon, you know Stacy, here's what he wrote his clients. He said, for investors worried about AI capex sustainability, we now have another deep-pocketed customer willing and capable to spend large amounts of money on a clearly strategic push as Saudi Arabia attempts to position itself as a regional and global AI hub. Your response to that, Patrick?
I agree with Stacy, and I view this as incremental upside. Right, this wasn't factored into my calculations in terms of this capex. It was typically we just look at the Mag 7 and what they committed to. This was very much not in the Mag 7 capital expenditure updates, and it's an upside. One interesting thing, though, about this is that we're researching right now is this potentially going to take away any business out of Western Europe that has put up nearly every blockade to drive innovation, AI, and it's not that protecting people's information is important. It is, but when they find themselves drastically behind other parts of the world, this could be a move for the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar to take market share away from Western Europe.
And Patrick, I love that you bring up the global perspective. This is something I was speaking with Gil Luria about earlier today in regards to China's role in this dynamic here. We were talking about the fact that Bank of America does say that the Saudi deal will offset any restrictions that put a curb on China's ability to increase purchases of chips. But that doesn't seem to be consensus. Gil was telling me there's a concern that more severe China restrictions are still a risk for NVIDIA. So where do you net out on that?
So when it comes to China, right, you have a lot of different camps inside of DC, which is why it looks like there's mixed messages. On one day, you'll have President Trump saying one thing, and then you'll have somebody in the cabinet saying something slightly different, and then you'll have a senator who might be a China hawk really lean in. So there's a lot of discussion going on there. I think, though, that the AI diffusion law, as it relates to the Middle East and Saudi Arabia and Qatar in specific, that will disincent those regions from buying Chinese semiconductors, which I think is a net positive, but also the restrictions that we were going to put on countries like Saudi Arabia and Qatar are no longer the case.
So Patrick, put a bow on this for me for NVIDIA investors. Is this rally just the beginning, or is this a temporary bounce?
This is likely a temporary bounce, but it's a consistent bounce because it will likely lead to a net revenue and profit upside for NVIDIA. I still think China is the number one element and region to figure out for some sort of a big rally with NVIDIA, but we've seen some early softening in the tones that the administration has put out there. And I do believe that if Trump administration can craft a real deal, right? Because what we saw earlier was a framework for a deal and pulling back to what one of your guests said, which still is the highest tariffs we've ever seen, then we could see even more restrictions being pulled back on China.